Hoot! I want to talk about a man who lied to a child for 6 years, who kept him emotionally isolated, chronically underinformed, and surrounded by managed loss, who raised them deliberately and knowingly to die, and was still, somehow, one of the most beloved characters in modern fiction. I want to talk about why that is, not to defend him, not to condemn him, but to understand what kind of person chooses to be the villain of someone else's story in order to save them. I am a small owl. I have thought about this a great deal. We shall begin. Let us be precise about what Dumbledore actually withheld. He knew from at least Harry's fear that Harry carried a fragment of Voldemort's soul inside him, that Harry was, functionally, a Horcrux, that for Voldemort to be mortal, Harry would have to die. He watched Harry train, he watched Harry form attachments, build friendships, fall in love with being alive, and he said nothing, because he needed Harry to reach the end of the story before he understood what the end required. There's a philosophical concept called paternalistic deception, the idea that withholding truth from someone is justified if knowing the truth will prevent them from doing what needs to be done. Doctors practice a version of this. Generals practice a version of this. Dumbledore practiced the fullest version of it. The question philosophy asks about paternalistic deception is not whether it works. Sometimes it does. The question is, who gave you the right? Dumbledore decided, alone, that Harry's consent to his own death was less important than the outcome of that death. He decided that for Harry, without Harry. And he was not wrong about the outcome, but that is a different thing from having the right. The lie is real, the deception is real, and it sits uncomfortably alongside the fact that it worked. There is a tradition in philosophy and literature of the mentor figure. Aristotle described the ideal teacher as someone who shapes not just the mind of the student, but their character, who is present, who is available, who meets the student where they are. Dumbledore fails this almost completely. He is warm at the distance, wise in ways that only become clear in retrospect, present for the grand moments and absent for the ordinary ones. For 5 books, he avoids Harry's eyes. He keeps Harry at arm's length under the justification of protection, specifically the protection of the connection between Harry's mind and Voldemort's. But the effect, whatever the justification, is a boy who spends his most informative and dangerous years chronically alone. Harry doesn't learn occlumency properly, a skill that could have saved Sirius, because the person who should have taught him refused to be in a room with him long enough. And then there is Sirius. Sirius Black was the closest thing Harry had to a parent who loved him completely and unconditionally, not as a symbol, and not as a weapon, as a person. Dumbledore kept them apart throughout Order of the Phoenix. Sirius was confined to Grimmauld Place, while Harry was at school, isolated and increasingly reckless. And then, in the Department of Mysteries, Sirius died. Dumbledore arrived, the battle ended, but Sirius was already through the veil. Too late. I have spent considerable time, for now, sitting with that phrase. Too late. Was it? Or was the timing, and I want to be careful here, because I'm not certain, and certainty would be dishonest. Was the timing something that could have been prevented? Dumbledore knew Voldemort was using Harry's emotional connections against him. He knew that someone would go to the ministry. He had the order. He had resources. Did he arrive too late because he miscalculated? Or did the world in which Sears survived produce a Harry with too much left to lose? I do not know, and the fact that I cannot know that Dumbledore's failures and his calculations are indistinguishable from the outside is itself the indictment. A mentor who operates this way forfeits the right to be trusted, even if he is right. And here is where I have to complicit everything I have just said. Because Dumbledore did not invent the constraint he was working inside. The prophecy, spoken by Sybil Trelawney before Harry was born, was fixed. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord must die at his hand, or neither can live while the other survives. Only Harry or Voldemort could end it. That was not a choice Dumbledore made. That was the rule. Now, philosophers have written a great deal about fate and free will, and I will not exhaust you with all of it. But there is a concept worth introducing here. What the Stoics call the dichotomy of control. The idea that wisdom consists of knowing the difference between what you can change and what you cannot, and directing your energy accordingly. Dumbledore looked at the prophecy, a fixed, immovable constraint, and asked a different question from the one most people ask. Most people ask, how do I prevent this? Dumbledore asked, given that cannot prevent this, how do I make the outcome survivable? And that reframes everything, the lies, the absences, the managed losses. They were not a god playing with a child's life. They were a man navigating inside wars he did not build, trying to produce the only ending in which Voldemort dies and Harry lives. He was not the architect of Harry's fate, he was its interpreter. That is not an absolution. The deception is real, the absences are still real, the grief Sirius's death caused is still real, but it changes the nature of the accusation. Dumbledore was not cruel, he was constrained, and he bore the weight of that constraint alone for decades and told no one. That is its own kind of courage, a very cold and lonely one. Let us talk about what Dumbledore actually achieved. He identified the Horcruxes, he began dismantling them at the cost of his own life. He recruited Snape, the only person in the world who hated him enough to be believed by Voldemort. And he built the most complex and precise double-agent operation in the history of the Wizarding world. He gave Snape a role that required Snape to kill him, and he asked Snape to do it, to preserve Snape's cover, to control the manner of his own death. He designed his own ending, and he built a version of Harry Potter. Through years of careful, painful, withholding love, was capable of walking to the forest alone without being told, and offering himself up. The plan worked, not because of luck, not because of accident, because Dumbledore saw the whole board, held the whole plan inside himself for decades, and executed it with extraordinary precision. There is a utilitarian argument here, the greatest outcome for the greatest number. And it is not entirely wrong. Voldemort fell, countless lives were saved, the Wizarding world survived. But I find myself less interested in the utilitarian calculus and more interested in the personal one. Dumbledore chose to be unreachable. He chose to be unknowable. He chose to make himself into something Harry could respect and trust but never fully have. Because being fully had, being loved as a person rather than a figure, would have compromised the plan. He sacrificed his own legibility as a human being for the outcome. That is what I mean by calculated hero. Not that he was cold, but that he chose the plan over the relationship. every time until the very end. Harry dies in the forest, and he wakes up at King's Cross, and Dumbledore is there, and Dumbledore tells him everything. The Horcrux, the plan, the reason for all of it. And Harry, who has just learned he was raised to die, that the man he trusted most withheld this from him for his entire life, does not rage. He grieves, and then he forgives. I have thought about this scene more than almost anything else in the series because philosophically it is extraordinary. Harry's forgiveness at King's Cross is not naive. He is not a child anymore. He understands exactly what Dumbledore did and why, and he forgives him anyway. There are two ways to read the forgiveness. The first is that Harry, after everything, understands that Dumbledore was working psychostrains that made the deception necessary, that the love underneath it is real, even if the expression of it is almost unrecognizable as love. The second is that Harry, at the end of a war, simply does not have the energy left to be angry, that the forgiveness is exhaustion dressed as wisdom. And I think, and this is Featherus, not a philosopher, I think it might be both. I think Harry forgive Dumbledore the way you forgive someone who hurt you trying to help you, not because the hurt was real, but because the love underneath it was also real. And because understanding the full picture made anger fear beside the point. The plan worked, Sirius is gone, Harry lived, Voldemort fell, the cost was enormous, and the outcome was worth it, and none of those things cancel each other out. They all simply exist, side by side, permanently. That is what the King's Cross scene is about. The truth is always more complicated than the verdict. Dumbledore was a liar. He was an absent hero. Mentor, I meant. He was an absent mentor. He was a calculated hero. He was a prisoner of a prophecy he did not write. And this is all from Featherus. Remember, there's magic in all of you.